I was considered bad luck because my mother had died giving birth to me. And in China, there is a superstition called ke. And the baby who was supposed to have killed her mother, so to speak, is considered very bad luck. And on top of that, I was a girl, and I was the youngest of 5 stepchildren. So really, as far as the caste system in our home was concerned, I was considered the lowest of the low.
When her mother died, Adeline Yen Mah's father, a wealthy industrialist, remarried. His new wife, a beautiful Eurasian woman, rejected Adeline. Over the years, her stepmother turned the rest of the family against Adeline, and she became an outcast from her own family.
I was only in China for the first 10 years of my life, and then in Hong Kong for a few more. But I suppose those are the years that mold a person and leave the deepest impressions.
Adeline Yen Mah left Hong Kong when she was 14. She completed her studies in London and the United States, going on to become a successful doctor. Despite the family's rejection, she never gave up hope that one day she would be accepted. When her stepmother died in 1990 and cut Adeline out of her will, Adeline's sense of betrayal inspired her to write a book about her life. The publication of Falling Leaves in 1997 led to widespread media interest.
Adeline Yen Mah was born in China in 1937, the daughter of an affluent businessman. Her great-aunt was one of China's most independent early feminists, refusing as a little girl to have her feet bound and founding the well-known and highly successful Woman's Bank of Shanghai. But despite her strong-willed antecedents, Adeline, the youngest of 5 children, was to become the unwanted Chinese daughter. In her description of her childhood in Falling Leaves, she portrays herself as lower than the family dog. Adeline, that is an extraordinary description.
The emotional story of an unwanted daughter growing up in the prosperous Shanghai of the 1940s struck a chord with many people.
When I was a child, still in primary school in Shanghai, I hope that my book will reach out to many readers all over the world, especially to those who have been rejected or felt downtrodden as a child. There were 7 children in our family, 5 from father's first wife and 2 from our stepmother. From the earliest years to which my memory reaches, I have been treated with contempt by my parents and siblings. My only friend was my Aunt Baba, the older sister of my father. Waiting for my Aunt Baba to come home from her mahjong games, I used to weave fantastic stories in my head to take myself away from the awful reality of my daily existence, and dream of a time when I could blurt out to the world all that was buried inside of me. I wanted to harness my outrage and my sorrow into doing something positive. The result is Falling Leaves.
The story Falling Leaves is really 2 stories. It is the story of Adeline Yen Mah, and it is also the story of China. And those 2 journeys proceed side by side. Sometimes they overlap and sometimes they are quite separate. What is remarkable to me, as somebody who does not know much about China's literature, is that this is a universal story too, Adeline Yen Mah.
Thank you. I know very well that in revealing my past, I have broken many taboos entrenched in Chinese society for the last 2,500 years. The title of my book, Falling Leaves, comes from a Chinese proverb, 落叶归根, which means falling leaves return to their roots. The proverb tells us that as we get older, We tend to go back to our beginnings. It also symbolizes the return of the wandering child to her ancestral home.
In 1964, Adeline decided to escape her roots and to start a new life in the United States. She finally settled in California and specialized in anesthesia.
I left Hong Kong when I was 14 years old, and I went to school in England. Then I practiced for a year in Hong Kong, where I encountered tremendous discrimination because I was not a graduate of Hong Kong University. I was a graduate of the University of London. And I was considered very much an outsider and resented. And when I came to California, even though there was some discrimination, compared to Hong Kong, it was much less. And I was actually encountered less prejudice here than anywhere else in the world, actually. I was very happy here on the whole. I started working at this hospital as soon as I finished my residency in 1968. I was asked to do a locum here. I didn't realize it at that time. I thought I would only be here for a month, but it turned out that I was here for 20 years.
Adeline's practice was very successful, and she became chief of anesthesia. But Adeline could not forget her roots, and in 1994 she decided to give up medicine to spend more time writing her book.
I haven't read the book, and I've started to read it many times, and I know it really saddens and hurts her that I haven't read the book, but when I read about her as a little girl, and I read about how she was at boarding school and how no one loved her and she was alone and lonely, it makes me very, very, very sad. And it's almost like I can't bear to read it because that's my mother. And it's hard for me to disassociate the woman who's my mother, who's a very strong, independent person, from the portrait of the little girl who's very hurt and alone.
There is this emotional linkage with the motherland, so to speak.
I don't remember.
Perhaps it's the food, culture. It's all very evocative. I do have a lot of feeling towards China.
I think she's much more westernized from growing up in Hong Kong and also going to school in England and living here in the United States for the majority of her life. I wouldn't characterize her as being traditionally Chinese.
I actually disagree. I think that at her heart there's very much a yearning for China. And I know she says when she goes away and she eats a lot of foreign foods, she always wants to come home and have rice. Is always a phrase we've heard. And I think at her core there's a very, very much a yearning for China. She thinks of that as her home, her heartland.
People ask me, where is your home? And now it's become very difficult to answer. But I do have strong feelings towards Shanghai. This is where, so to speak, I was made. And what I became afterwards arose from those few years that I spent here. In the evenings, this street was extremely lively. I used to see my father and my stepmother Nyang dressed up very elegantly. My father in his tuxedo, and my stepmother always in Western ball gowns and with diamonds flashing on her ears, at her throat, and on her fingers. The Peace Hotel in the 40s used to be known as the Cathay Hotel, and it was the in spot, so to speak. I think no coward stayed there in the 30s. And it was the place to stay at for foreigners coming into Shanghai. And they also had a very famous jazz band, which used to play in the bar.
Nighttime in dear old Shanghai, then I'm dancing, sweetheart, with you. And it's trying night in dear old Shanghai, with all its all now. In my arms.
Of course, we are all shaped by history. And Shanghai was the major port in China during the 19th and the first half of the 20th century. And it was the gateway into China and really the window to the rest of the world. And growing up, a lot of us, we learned English from a very early age. And we were familiar with both Eastern and Western cultures. And I think this was a great advantage as we grew up because we live in both worlds. It is a very poignant city for me. I think I have more emotion towards Shanghai than anywhere else in the world, even though I only lived here until the age of 10. But I suppose the first 10 years of your life are the most important and leave the deepest impression. My book, 落叶归根, a lot of it takes place in this very house. This is the back entrance to the house. When I was a child, I used to walk home every day from school, and we were not allowed to enter the house through the front entrance because my stepmother reserved that for important guests. And we were supposed to come home through the back entrance, which is this way. And I would walk up the stairs every day. I don't remember opening my mouth once during any of the meal times. I actually sat in silence and terror. This is the balcony attached to my grandfather Ye's room. And I used to play here for hours. I always felt very comfortable here because my grandfather and I had a very close relationship. And we used to play a lot of Chinese chess together in this very room. And this was the room that I shared with my aunt, Aunt Baba. And this was my sanctuary. We had a writing desk right here against the window. And I remember spending hour after hour here practicing calligraphy and also writing my compositions and reading my books, which I loved. This room holds a lot of memories for me. I was the lowest of the low, and they had a dog called Jackie who used to roam in the garden. And Jackie would be very well fed and very well loved because my father and Franklin would throw Jackie's scraps from the table. And I remember quite a few times in my room, really quite hungry sometimes, looking at Franklin throwing his scraps to the dog and closing my eyes and wishing with all my heart that when I opened them again, I would be the dog and the dog would be me. It's been the tradition in China to look up to the males and look down on the females. In fact, this is known as 重男轻女. And the attitude probably arose from the teachings of Confucius, who lived 2,500 years ago. And his writing was very much revered for the last 2,500 years. And Confucius had proclaimed that when a woman is born, she should obey her father. When she marries, she should obey her husband. And when he dies, she should obey her son. So essentially, women were supposed to be second-class citizens as long as they lived. And Confucius had also declared that only an uneducated woman was virtuous. So for thousands of years, Chinese parents deliberately did not educate their girls, their daughters. This is the lane that I would take every day, which will lead on to Avenue Joffre, walk then along Avenue Joffre to go to school. When we first arrived, it was still under French Vichy administration. And a lot of the stores had bilingual signs, which were in Chinese and French. And the pavements used to be bustling with pedestrians, some of them very elegantly dressed. The streets were filled with motor cars, intermingling with pedicabs, rickshaws, and carts. So it was a mixture of old and new. And the cars were the latest models, often chauffeur-driven. The trams ran from door to door between our house and the school. The first stop would be the garden. This neighborhood was considered rather elegant, but at the same time, there was a lot of poverty. Along tree-lined Avenue Joffre, you could see beggars, often little children in rags, foraging in the garbage cans for something to eat. And some of them were forced to peel the bark off the sycamore trees in order to fill their stomachs. And often during the early mornings, when I walked to school, I used to see little babies wrapped in newspapers, left in doorways to die. And you knew that those babies were invariably girl babies, because even the poorest families found a way to house and feed their sons. And I used to walk past them with eyes averted, because obviously there was nothing I could do. All I could think of was that I hope this doesn't happen to me.
In 1949, after the communists took over Shanghai, Adeline's family moved to Hong Kong.
A lot of the Shanghai entrepreneurs went to Hong Kong and helped build up the industry and the commerce in Hong Kong. Today, Hong Kong is much more prosperous than Shanghai. And a lot of the Hong Kong people have replaced Shanghai to a large extent as the window to and out of China.
Adeline's memories of her time in Hong Kong were an important part of her book.
The car was saturated with the scent of my stepmother's expensive perfume, making me dizzy with premonition. To my amazement, the car stopped in front of the elegant Peninsula Hotel. Inside, the cool, high-ceilinged lobby restaurant, elegantly decorated with potted palms, whirring overhead fans, and rattan furniture. I sat gingerly in a large bamboo chair. A chamber orchestra struck up the Blue Danube Waltz. A wave of nausea seized me. I longed to escape to the bathroom, but sat glued to my seat.
For 50 years, Adeline had been unable to tell her friends about her life. Writing the book helped Adeline to confront her past.
But Adeline, thank you. I mean, I think we were fairly close friends when we were in London.
Yes.
We didn't know there was so much turmoil going underneath. Why did it take you so long before you opened up and talk about it? I mean, if you talked about it earlier, it probably wouldn't be so painful.
That's very true. I've asked that question myself. And in a way, even now, when I talk about it, it's still, you can hear, I'm still affected. Emotionally affected. It was, I suppose, all my life, I miss my mother, whom I never knew. Whose photograph I never saw. And in a way, It's been a lifelong search for my mother. That's what my life has been all about. And it's something that you don't want to reveal because it's because I never found her. And it was impossible for me to talk about it in those days. Sorry, Jean. Also, I wanted to keep up this facade that I came from a loving family, because somehow psychologically it was important to me to believe that. And yes, I never said anything. And I always pretended that everything was fine and that my parents loved me. But when my stepmother died, and I had all the sorrow inside, because I realized that I would never get her approval. And she died without my ever having her approval.
How come your father let your stepmother do all that to you?
I have a theory, because he was cruel not only to me. They were most unforgivably, they were cruel to my grandfather, my father's father. That to me was the most painful thing, because even as a child, I knew that one day I would escape. But I knew that for my grandfather, the years were numbered, and that they could treat my grandfather that way. I still find it difficult in my heart to forgive my father. You must remember that my father grew up in a Shanghai that was still under foreign domination. He grew up in a French concession. And quite honestly, I think he felt that the French were superior.
You mean that's why he chose your stepmother, because
Yes.
she's half French and she has this superiority?
Exactly. Unfortunately, I think he allowed his behavior to be colored by her throughout his life. And whatever she told him to do, he did. She was very beautiful. And even though she was half French, she called herself French. Her last name was Prosperous. And she always said to people, I'm French. And he introduced her very proudly as my French wife. When I was a little girl, I wanted ballet lessons, but nobody ever gave them to me because my stepmother told me that they could not afford it. The form of ballet is really a mixture of Eastern and Western cultures. And in a way, my book, Falling Leaves, is a clash of Eastern and Western cultures within my family. Because my stepmother, whom we called her Nyang, was actually just like you. She was half French and half Chinese. Her father was French and her mother was Chinese. And she was also trilingual. She could speak perfect French and perfect English and perfect Chinese. The 3 years that I spent in Hong Kong, between the ages of 11 and 14, I was literally a prisoner at the Sacred Heart Convent. And I did not have my aunt with me. And there was literally nobody to turn to. And I never confided in any of my friends. In fact, they had no idea of my unhappy home life. To go back there, to meet my friends, and to talk about the past, but completely openly. And to have them read the book and understand. It was emotionally shattering in many ways, but it was also extremely uplifting. From the balcony. I tend to be an optimist. I had to be an optimist, otherwise I would not have survived. To people my age, history is not some piecemeal hearsay event placed together into canvas, so to speak. It is a palpable, living, tumultuous series of happenings which I personally experienced. All my life, I wanted to be accepted by my parents. And in fact, Falling Leaves describes the striving of all 7 of us for the approval of our parents. And it ends with my father's will and my stepmother's will, were like their messages to us from beyond the grave.
Adeline's final rejection by her parents inspired her to write Falling Leaves. The book is a personal story of an unwanted daughter searching for approval, but it's also about the position of women in China.
Obviously, my book describes the status of women in China. We all grew up in roughly the same era. Do you think it's changed at all, the attitude towards women in Chinese society in Hong Kong?
Now?
Yes,
yes,
now.
It changed a lot.
Yeah,
Changed a lot.
completely.
In what way, Betty, do you think?
In what way? Well, like in our days, right?
Yes.
We were more or less the unwanted children, the unwanted daughters, including myself. My mother cried when I was born.
What about when your parents died? Are they still alive, Betty?
My mother died when I was 7. That's why I went to boarding school.
I see. And your father, when did he die?
Oh, not much later, when I was already an adult, yeah.
Now, in his will, did he leave the same for you and your brothers, or was it very different?
In my mother's will, I was very, very lucky because I was given a good proportion, and I considered myself very lucky.
Even though it wasn't as much?
No, not as much, but I was very, very happy already because he always told me I was considered very lucky in a Chinese family.
Because
being a daughter.
Nothing was left to me. A will is a very powerful document because it's really a balance sheet of the feelings of your father and mother towards each of us. It is the last and final letter that he or she writes to you from beyond the grave. And there's nothing you can do about it, essentially. There's no further dialogue possible. You cannot explain. You cannot protest. And if the message is a total rejection, it hurts. It's not the money as such. It is the fact that you never belonged.
That's right.
And you had no place in their heart.
Yeah.
And I
As
think
if, you're nothing.
you're nothing. Exactly. Exactly. Recently, one of my relatives said to me that lots of Chinese women have had it much worse than me. Compared to them, my submissive silence is exactly what I wish to alter. How can change come about when no one speaks out? I would like my epitaph to read, "Here lies Adeline Yen Mah, author of Falling Leaves. She was Chinese, and she dared to tell the truth about her family."